Hello and welcome to On the Brink. I'm Nick Carter. Today we're sitting down with Blake Masters, who is the Republican candidate for the 2022 election for U.S. Senate in Arizona. Blake is well known for having co-authored 0 to 1 with Peter Thiel. He's also the chief operating officer at Thiel Capital. Blake is definitely one of the most explicitly pro-crypto and pro-Bitcoin candidates running for the Senate right now, which is why I wanted to get him on the show and pick his brain on his crypto policy agenda. Today we talk about why he's running for Senate in Arizona, how he'd bring his venture experience to bear in Congress, and then his views on whether the U.S. should establish a Bitcoin reserve, how Bitcoin could shore up the U.S. dollar, how to think about sanctions in a world where cryptocurrency exists, and then other topics like modern monetary theory, whether the U.S. is facing a risk of default, explanations for inflation and why they are lacking, and of course, big tech, deplatforming, and whether decentralized internet infrastructure and applications can possibly be a solution here. Blake is an incredibly thoughtful candidate, especially on the topic of cryptocurrency, and it was a real privilege to get him on the show. Let's dive right into it. So Blake Masters, you're running for Senate in Arizona. A lot of us are watching your campaign very closely. You've also made some pretty pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin statements. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Should be fun.
So outside of any crypto topics, tell us about your platform and why you're running for office.
Well, I'm running basically because things don't work. I look at what's happening and it just seems like we're losing the country. You know, we don't have a real border right now with Mexico. It's completely open. 225,000 people are coming here illegally every month, not year, every month. Fentanyl's coming through. China's shipping that fentanyl, right? Disastrous inflation. The left says it's 7% and it's transitory. Nope. I think the real Costco basket of goods is 11%, 12%, double-digit inflation, and it's going to get worse. And so on just like basically every front, I think get people in charge. Right now it's the Democrats, but too many Republicans too. We don't care anymore about like whether stuff actually works. I just want a normal, healthy country where people can raise a family and work and worship in peace and prosperity. As cliche as that sounds, but like, my gosh, we used to have it. We don't really have it anymore. And I'm just sick and tired of politics as usual. So try to get in and see how much one person can do to change things.
Totally. You first came on my radar thanks to 0 to 1, which I think is every venture capitalist's favorite book. Aside from that, you've worked at Thiel Capital. You didn't even realize, but you were a law clerk back in the day. So, what of those experiences are you drawing on the most as you now dive into politics?
Well, so I've been running Thiel Capital with Peter for the last few years, and I've gotten to do many things. It's like I've seen so much of what works and what doesn't work in business and startups and investing. Writing 0 to 1 was a good experience. Just the level of rhetoric and, obviously it's a business book, but it's also about politics. And I've been paying attention to politics for a long time. Peter and I got involved in the Trump 2016 campaign, and then I served transition team once President Trump won in 2016. And so I feel like I've gotten to, in kind of just a few short years, I've gotten legal experience, investing experience, general business experience, right? And politics too. Like I've gotten to do a lot of different things, and it's the interdisciplinary nature of it all that I think is making me a pretty unique and compelling candidate. And it's also going to make me super effective as a U.S. Senator. Maybe not expert in any one thing, but I think I have the general decline of our society well diagnosed, and some innovative ideas on how we can shake things up and improve things.
So aside from, day trading on inside info, which is what the Nancy Pelosi's of the world are doing, would you say that there is sort of insufficient investing expertise in the Senate or the House, in Congress generally? I mean, is there a dearth of sort of actual business expertise in Congress right now?
I think so. But it's also it's not just the case that you need more business people to run for Congress. I think in general that's sort of healthier. It's like I'd rather have business people, outsiders, than career politicians or something like that. But I'm also not a candidate that runs around just saying like I'm going to run the government like a business, because okay, it's not a business, and I think a lot of those people aren't that effective. Let me just pick on the Republicans a little bit, pick on my own side. I think Republicans in Congress, some exceptions, but almost without exception, they're just reactive. And so the left prosecutes its agenda. I think it doesn't make sense for the country. I think it's a bad agenda. But the right is always just defensive. And so it's like, what is the left trying to pass this week? What are they trying to pass this month? Nobody's thinking about like 5 and 10 year time horizons. Do we invest enough? Does Congress have enough investing expertise? I think one interesting lens about venture capital is like, you're making bets that, won't really literally pay off until 7, 8, 9 years later. And so you're not just thinking about the life cycle of a company, but you're also thinking about, at the level of decades, what does this mean? Like, what's Web3 going to mean? What does crypto mean? How is it fundamentally going to change things? And you get a much more macro perspective. And yeah, I do think that'll be helpful. I do think we need on all sides of the aisle, but especially I care about my side and cleaning my side up. We need Republicans to be thinking about like, how do we have a country in 20 years? Because at the current clip, by default, we're not going to.
So speaking of crypto, I mean, one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on the show was, A, I respect the platform that you have and the views that you maintain, but also B, you have been explicitly pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin. So where would you put yourself on, on that spectrum of sort of Brad Sherman to Cynthia Lummis, who's probably our most pro-Bitcoin member of Congress?
I think Lummis is great. I think she's shown a lot of leadership on this crypto issue. And I was just laughing a little bit at Brad Sherman because I just don't understand that mentality. Like he doesn't even know this stuff well enough to have an intelligent opinion on like why we should. I think nip it in the bud was his quote, right?
Right.
Lummis is really good on this stuff.
Yeah, she's a beacon for sure. So, what are your sources when it comes to the crypto industry? I mean, there's just so much information. It moves so fast. It's, pretty diverse, heterogeneous industry. There's a lot of things going on. Where do you learn from?
Well, Twitter, a lot of it. And I had probably now's a good time to disclaim I'm not an expert in crypto or anything like that. Like, I got into it fairly early and it's fascinating to me, but it also moves so fast, so I don't pretend to keep up with every latest development, but, I'll follow Twitter. I follow Vitalik's blog. I'll see Selkis on Twitter. I'll listen to, Pompliano's podcast. And I feel like just following a couple of key people in Bitcoin Twitter and crypto Twitter, I'm just sort of able to keep my fingers weekly on the pulse here.
So one of your probably most notable tweets was after China banned really all Bitcoin exchange, Bitcoin mining, that we should do the opposite and as a country obtain a strategic reserve of Bitcoin. So, as it pertains to that reserve, would you imagine that as just being part of sort of the Federal Reserve portfolio or, inching us towards sort of a newer gold standard built on the back of Bitcoin, something like that?
Well, I think the latter would be the healthiest. I've been going around saying for a while on the campaign that Bitcoin is the hardest money that we have. And I was a pro gold guy. I still like gold, but it's not Bitcoin, is it? I was a Ron Paul sort of 2007, 2008 Republican, and I've had criticisms of the Fed for a long time. But, practically speaking, yeah, it's probably just more of a stepping stone towards a sounder monetary policy. But hey, if that's what we got to do, I think every inch in the right direction towards financial freedom and a sound monetary policy is an inch we should be taking advantage of.
So this is one of the tensions, I guess, is that, the dollar is so central to our actually strategic interests, right? It's one of the main ways that we project power abroad. Obviously, sanctions is sort of our primary weapon of war We don't really fight many conventional wars these days, but we use sanctions all the time. And, that's where I run into issues with even Republican members of Congress. They take umbrage at the idea that anyone ought to be embracing anything other than the dollar because it might impair, our sanctions-making ability. How do you sort of, square that circle in terms of the apparent conflict between an independent monetary system and the virtues of that, and then, the potential costs to us as a nation where we have so much dependence on the dollar system?
Yeah, well, I think any change is not going to happen overnight here. But I also think change is coming. Like the U.S. dollar and the government's ability to sort of use or abuse, depending on your perspective, the reserve currency status just to achieve certain geopolitical aims. That's got a long history, but I'm not sure it's going to work forever the same way it's been working. And, we could talk a little bit more about that, but I think that, there's a good argument to make, at least, that Bitcoin is good for the U.S. dollar because it's the one check on the Fed that we have. When I'm in the Senate, I'll try to, have meaningful oversight and sort of put checks on the Fed, get checks on the Fed on the legislative side. But, Bitcoin is apolitical, it's technological, and now it's getting adoption. And I think cat's out of the bag. And so it may just be this depoliticized, piece of technology that's sort of extraneous check on the Fed. And if that's going to make the Fed, on a relative basis, behave a lot better over the next 10, 20, 30 years, maybe it's got this incredibly non-inflationary effect. They can't print all the money if people are just going to flock to Bitcoin. So I think there's an argument that it's going to shore up the dollar and make it relevant for a lot longer.
Yeah, the Fed is increasingly trending in this direction of being activist institution, and there's a certain strain of progressivism that looks to the Fed to finance some of these ideas of the Green New Deal or generic concepts like racial justice or racial equity. We seem to be hearing about these more and more, and there's actually opposition to Jay Powell's renomination on the basis that he wasn't prepared to undertake these activist measures from his seat at the Federal Reserve.
Yep.
Which is kind of insane to think that the Fed itself could solve problems like climate or racial equity.
It's insane. I mean, it's insane. It's like analogous it to the military, right? The military's job is to put warheads on foreheads, right? To just prosecute and win military campaigns, to project lethal power anywhere instantly so that America wins, right? That's the job. Well, it's being taken over by woke politics. And you get these, teaching soldiers critical race theory. I mean, it's just, this stuff really does infect these woke progressive ideas, really do infect these systems. And when you think about that happening to the Fed, right, which I guess charged with the twin goals of low inflation and low unemployment, like the Fed already wasn't maybe doing so well before it started to get infected by woke politics. And so if you imagine that the Federal Reserve system just gets like weaponized to fight racial justice or whatever the cause du jour is of the left at the time, like it's going to be a disaster. It is going to be a giant disaster, maybe even worse than woke politics in the military. I don't know how anyone could disagree with that.
Yeah, some would say that it's just pretextual. I don't know if anyone's thinking this far ahead of time, but there's an argument to be made that it's pretextual for inflating the Fed's balance sheet to, let's say, $30 trillion, that you do that in the name of progressivism or the Green New Deal, which might become necessary or perceived as necessary to reset the fiscal position and to perform full debt monetization. So maybe it's just the case that we'll need an excuse to have the Fed effectively do full scale monetization of the debt and inflate its balance sheet.
And surely, Nick, you're not against racial justice, so you have to go along with it. Otherwise, you're a bigot. Yeah. That is the logic of the left for sure.
So yeah, I mean, we might be on the brink of a truly inflationary reset. I mean, the likes of which I think the analogy would be the 1940s. After World War II, we had debt to GDP north of 130%. That's sort of where we are today. and we had high inflation and low rates for a long time. Speaking of which, a lot of people would allege that sort of modern monetary theory is driving policy discussions in Washington, is the de facto economic theory that drives congressional policy making effectively. Although the MMTers kind of ever deny that they're in power. Do you have a view of this and sort of the sustainability of these ideas, and how they've been expressing themselves in kind of recent legislation?
Yeah, I think the MMTers denying that they're in power is the classic left-wing thing. Like when you're in power, you still pretend to be the victim, and we need to go ever further left, right? They're clearly in power. Like functionally, that's how it works right now, and it's unsustainable, And so whether we literally default or whether we have a good financial future, it depends. It depends on what we do. I think one of the things that's actually saved the dollar so far has been the fact that like every other central bank is sort of always abusing its own currency too, and so there's no other safe asset. We're the reserve currency, and if crypto gains steam as it has been, right, in Bitcoin, I think people begin to see like if we just keep at this current clip, no, there's life after a dollar, and it looks a lot like Bitcoin. And so that's one. I'm always sort of against like trillions and trillions and crazy social spending, and so I'd be against Build Back Better and the Biden administration's spending plans, anyways. But it's especially dangerous because if we keep doing this, now that we have a viable alternative, and this is just the flip side of the coin of what I said 5 minutes ago, that Bitcoin might be the real check on the Fed. Now that there is an alternative, maybe all the spending just turns the dollar to junk really fast. And so it seems like it's suicide to continue down on the same path that we've been going down for decades. Like even my kids understand you can't keep spending the money that you don't have. Well, if there's an alternative that the capital is going to flee to, maybe that's it for the dollar if we print another 10 trillion of them in the next year or two.
Yeah, and I think that's really the constraint on MMT is they build these, idealized models of the economy. And, they rightly point out that, you can't quote unquote default on a debt that's denominated in your own currency, but they fail to mention the fact that there's competitors to that currency and people can rapidly desert it if they lose faith in it. And the constraint that the MMTers always, admitted to prior to this inflationary episode was inflation, that if you undertake the MMT agenda, and the one way to note, the failure mode there is material inflation. Interestingly, now we have enormously high inflation, highest it's been in 40 years, I want to say, but there's no acknowledgement that it's monetary-led, fiscal-led. Instead, the finger is pointed at supply chains or antitrust. There's other purported explanations. I mean, what do you make of these sort of these explanations for inflation we have?
I think it's sophistry. Like I went back, I remembered, I think in July or August, AOC went on the news, and I was actually surprised. Like she did a competent job of articulating the exact wrong stance on this. So she was wrong, but I was actually surprised. But she got up and said, like, this inflation is transitory, it's sector specific, it has to do with supply chains and the pandemic and all this stuff. And I just went back and looked at that last week, and man, I knew it was wrong then, but it was just, in retrospect, it was just, especially just obviously wrong. Like you print $5 trillion and distribute it, and like, yeah, you're going to get inflation. Like at a certain point, it's possible to be too smart about this stuff. And the commonsensical thing is when you print shitloads of money in an economy where there's no slack to really pick that up, like you're going to get inflation. And so obviously there's a monetary cause here, and it's not transitory, and it hasn't just been sector specific. And it's what they have to say because they're in power and it's their fault. But and normal people are connecting this. I'm telling you, I'm campaigning every day here in Arizona. Normal, mostly talking to Republican voters right now, but like they see the gas prices and they, and supermarket shelves and where they're not bare, everything's more expensive. They know that this is somehow highly correlated, if not just caused by the reckless Biden administration spending agenda.
Yeah, I recently interviewed Representative Tom Emmer on this show, and he expressed regret that he voted for the CARES Act, but he
Yep.
also said that he had to because all of these businesses were being forcibly shut down, and he felt that there was no alternative at that point. That because the government was shutting down these businesses, they had a duty effectively to support them. But I guess the thing is that this expenditure went on way beyond just temporary
Yeah.
payments to businesses.
Look, probably the first coronavirus stimulus, like, you know, maybe you had to do because, and this is back, when Trump was president, of course, maybe you had to do that because, yeah, if you're going to shut down businesses, then you can't just shut businesses down and then totally deprive people of your livelihood, right? Like maybe you need some emergency injection. It went on far too long, far too many rounds of this. The Biden administration only just wants to increase it, and maybe the best solution, surprise, surprise, is like not to lock everything down in the first place. So I'm
Right.
sympathetic to Emmer's feeling on that, but it went on far too long, and you can't let the progressive left just hijack things like this. You see it with the government shutdown debates all the time. Oh, you couldn't possibly shut down the government. It's like, well, you don't negotiate with terrorists. And I feel like when the Dems are in charge, they try to use these shutdowns or use this similar kind of leverage as exactly that, as leverage to extract what they know they can't get through open debate.
So I want to change tack a little bit and talk about big tech. Obviously there's intersections with Web3, which people are excited about, but you've been pretty ardent about talking about we need to end the power and the discretion, the fact that these big tech firms are almost governments in their own right. In some cases, superseding the power of actual sovereign governments. You could argue that if an entity can deplatform the sitting president of the United States, they have some power that is superior to that of the government. Certainly, they do that to other heads of state too. It seems to me that we have a nominally private sector that kind of does the bidding of the left, whether they're in power or not. It's kind of a clever constitutional end around whereby they're not bound by the First Amendment, given that they're nominally private companies. What do you sort of propose in terms of solutions to this apparent quandary? Nobody really seems to have particularly good ideas beyond Section 230 reform. What do you make of this situation we're in and how we get out of it?
Yeah, I think people probably do talk too much about 230. Clearly, if you're actually a platform, maybe it makes sense, right? Why should you be liable for random stuff your users post if you're really just a platform? But obviously, if you are a publisher, like obviously, if you are editing content, suppressing left wing or suppressing right of center content, embracing left wing content, you're a publisher. You've got your thumb on the scale, and so you shouldn't enjoy the protections. So I think we should radically reform it or wipe it away for these companies that are acting like publishers. But the censorship problem is really bad. Like they deplatformed President Trump while he was president. That's nuts, right? Twitter banned Marjorie Taylor Greene. Say whatever you want about her politics. I like her politics. Some people don't, but everybody should be able to agree that you can't deplatform a sitting member of Congress. I think she just posted a link to the vaccine injury database too.
Right.
So this is wild, and I think we got to regulate these big communications companies, these social networks, as common carriers. And we know how to do this. It's just a phone company. The phone company can't listen to you and I having a telephone call and decide they don't like the political content of what we're talking about and ban us. Like they're literally not allowed to disconnect our service for that political reason. And so why on earth would we not treat Twitter or Facebook the same way? Like just hold them to the same standard as the phone company. Requires zero innovation, just requires lots of political will. And there's other problems with big tech too, of course, and maybe some of those are better addressed through an antitrust lens. The danger there is you just go and bust them up, and there's a slippery slope argument to that. But then also, do you just create, it's a whack-a-mole? You just create a lot more medium-sized problems. And some companies like Google, it's just a monopoly search engine, right? It doesn't even lend itself to antitrust. What would that even mean? All their other businesses account for like zero of their revenue and are fake. It's just a search engine. But I think the biggest problem with big tech, honestly, is their ability to swing elections. I think Facebook materially just changed and probably, swung the 2020 election by censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Yeah. And not just U.S. elections either. It seems like they feel they have a duty now to get involved in any kind of foreign election of any nature.
Absolutely. And then what does Google do? At least we know when Facebook censors something, because the content's there, poof, it's gone. Like, it's transparent in some sense. So here I am a year later complaining about it. But what about Google? Like, anybody who knows anything about Google and how it works and Silicon Valley knows Google's got the motive and the opportunity to, if they're subtle enough, and these are clever people, they can change the search engine algorithms weeks before the election in almost imperceptible ways, but in ways that move hundreds of thousands of votes. And that's all you needed in 2020. And, I think they got caught sleeping in 2016, didn't want to let it happen again. Can I prove that? No. But do I know a lot of rank and file engineers at Google who would, and do I suspect Google management wanted Trump again? Like, no, of course they didn't. So no one's got oversight over that. No one in capacity in the U.S. government does to its search algorithms in the weeks before an election. I think that's a huge problem.
Yeah, a friend of mine once said on his show, simply Google determines what exists. And it's terrifying that
well said.
They have the ability to determine, what we can see and what's real and what's not. So, I mean, so your preferred view is the common carrier approach, at least for the big tech platforms. I mean, what's your level of optimism around quote unquote Web3 as just a private sector competitive impulse, which reduces maybe some of the market power of these big tech firms?
I'm optimistic. Wouldn't put all my eggs in that basket. I do think we need legislative solutions. So that's what I'm going to go in and do, right? But it's also like let a thousand different versions bloom. I'm sick of the libertarian argument, like just go build your own Facebook. Well, people tried with Parler, right? I mean, you can't build your own in this current Web 2 model, and so unless you want to build your own, like just own every nut and bolt. Like, we invested in Rumble, which I think is a really good company, and they really had this foresight in 2013 to really own as much of the stack as possible. So I think it's pretty good, but like, it also took 7 or 8 years to build, and that's really hard and expensive. And no, if you're Parler right now, like, you're just totally beholden to not only AWS, but of course Apple and Google, to just get people to download your app. And I think that's intolerable. So to the extent we get decentralization with Web3 and meaningful alternatives, like, great, can't come soon enough. And my job is to sort of tag team it by getting into the U.S. Senate. And, however optimistic you are about Web3, Facebook and Google are here to stay for quite a while. And so I'm going to work on legislative solutions, to restrain them in a meaningful way as long as they exist. Yeah,
it's interesting. The libertarian argument is so hollow. I mean, just based on the empirical reality we saw with, you name it, you name your conservative platform, your Gab, your Parler, your Rumble. Gab, I think, ended up building the entire full stack of all internet services underneath them in order just to operate, whether it's hosting, registrar, DDoS protection, payment processing. They all had to find dedicated, sympathetic service providers or build their own. I mean, it's just unreal. It's unreal. It's the idea that you have to build every single rung on the ladder, every single piece of the stack, all the Legos. You have to homebrew it. It completely eliminates all the efficiencies that we've made startups and entrepreneurship possible on the internet. It like regresses us. So yeah, I don't see that as a fair thing to say, build your own. So speaking of which, one of the maybe overlooked historically rungs or parts of that stack, but most fundamental, is just simply payment processing. And in this country, we see a very explicit attempt to politicize finance, both high finance, like who has access to credit, with the ESG movement, in terms of eliminating spending on oil and gas, for instance. And then also, in more quotidian ways, like which influencers have access to, PayPal, Venmo, and payment processing generally. And we actually saw, I don't know if you're familiar, probably are, we saw this institutionalized with this program under Obama called Choke Point, which effectively targeted conservative businesses and deplatformed them from banks through the FDIC and the DOJ. And so that's sort of one of the arguments that people make in favor of stablecoins, which is, you're getting dollar denominated transactional units, but then they're sort of outside of the regulated bank sector. What do you make of stablecoins generally? How do you see them fitting in into the picture here?
Yeah, I'm pro, right? And look, you're the expert here. I'm not. My read is stablecoins, like, we still don't know. They're in such infancy, right? So thinking that we can identify some problem with them that's tractable and that would basically require legislation to regulate them right now, I think that's insane. I think that would stifle innovation. Obviously, you got to protect consumers from outright scams, right? Does Tether seem like a great idea? I don't know, probably not. But does that mean that most other projects are scams? Like, no. And so I think this is the kind of regulatory approach we need. It's a healthy respect for new technology, and you got to pay attention. But Congress needs to understand, if we just start shutting down, experimentation and innovation, all we do is, like, we just force it outside of our borders, right? I want to pay attention to stable coins. I want to see if people's criticisms are valid. Does it actually weaken our ability to impose sanctions and achieve geopolitical aims or something like that? I don't know. Maybe in theory. Let's see how it works before we just rush to ban things.
Yeah, there's, you say they're in their infancy. There's over 150 billion of them, so they're at least toddlers.
It's legit. It's like, it's not something that you need to nip in the bud. You couldn't even do that, right? I do think cat's out of the bag. When I mean infancy, I mean, like, let's see what happens. I think we're early on, but I wouldn't rush to try to put these things under the same financial regulatory structure that, like, the dollar operates in. I just think that would be insane.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, Elizabeth Warren was known as sort of the anti-big banks campaigner, but she's campaigning to put stablecoins under the bank charter model, even though they're not engaging in banking. And it seems like an attempt to cause stablecoins to be much more tightly regulated by the government itself, which is, it's paradoxical, because the reason stablecoins exist is because the U.S. bank sector is sclerotic and highly regulated and highly surveilled. And so it's just an attempt to fold it back into the state apparatus.
The state apparatus will they love the centralization, right? They love the state managed apparatus. Surprise, surprise. But I think what will work better for people over the long run is, open source, decentralized projects. That's true in software. I don't understand why that wouldn't be true in finance.
So, lastly, and speaking of which, central bank digital currencies, obviously we're going to see China's, digital yuan rolled out in full force at the Olympics here. That seems to be an explicit part of their desire to sort of de-dollarize the world, project power, and, get an even, tighter grip on surveillance and control. Worryingly, a lot of Western central bankers seem to really find this idea appealing, including, members of the Federal Reserve, although there's more discussion there still. What are your views generally on central bank digital currencies?
I think they're the government's dream, right? Like, if you were making a pitch to the government, who's about to invent money for the first time, it's like, okay, well, what if you could control every single dollar? Right? Who's got it at any given time, how they spend it, where they spend it. You can turn it off at the flip of a switch. You don't have to deal with cash or untraceable transactions or anything like that. It is a central banker's dream. And it's an authoritarian's dream. And I think that's why you're seeing so much development coming from China on this stuff. Right? You get the AI-powered surveillance society. You got your automated social credit score or whatever. Backed by a currency that they can digitally control to extract total compliance. So that's not a pipe dream. I do think that's coming. Hopefully that's not coming to the United States, right? And that's why I think we in the United States need to be working on legislation now to ensure that, like, literally a totalitarian digital financial system can't be built here. And so, maybe even if you banned a Fed CBDC, like, the government at some point is going to try to build a digital dollar. And so the question is, like, well, what kind are we going to have here? Is it going to be that, sort of cryptocurrency in name only, but actually it's just a mirror image of China's centralized system? Or no, do we actually learn from actual innovation in crypto and say, like, zero knowledge proof systems that allow Americans to maintain their privacy and have a more cash-like financial system, frankly, where citizens are protected from government snooping? That is obviously more American, obviously more healthy, obviously more democratic, lowercase d, and that's how we have a good future. Like, the Chinese future is not good, and we can learn from it.
So I think you've cultivated a bit of an audience in the crypto and Bitcoin community here. A lot of us are paying attention to your campaign. What would you say to that constituency? What's your message to them?
Get you a U.S. senator who actually understands this stuff, who's committed to the same principles, who's interested in these same projects for the reasons you are. I think it's clear I'm not like an expert on this stuff, and I intend to become expert and get a lot better. But I've got I think a unique combination of knowledge and interest in this space, but also a humility. I don't have some desire to go in and regulate it out of existence. Quite the opposite. There will be regulation in crypto and around crypto, and the question is, what does it look like? Do you have an advocate who understands, like, actual liberty is at stake here, and is going to go and try to block the bad stuff, and to the extent you got to do something, do the right stuff? Well, that's me. And I think a lot of candidates are learning to say they're pro crypto, but I think it's pretty easy for most of them just to memorize a few bullet points to say, like, oh, I'm pro Bitcoin. I think people could actually tell I am. Yeah. And I hope that's interesting to people.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that would stand up to scrutiny if they just gave lip service to it on this podcast. Blake, I know you're busy. You're literally on the campaign trail, right? You're in transit, driving, I hope safely, concentrating, two things at once. This has been really great. Thank you for some of your time and supporting you from here. So good
Thank
luck.
you for having me on. I'd invite anybody who's interested to go to my website, blakemasters.com. If you've got some extra crypto sitting around, you can donate it to my campaign. US dollar coin is actually a great way that we could take donations, makes the FEC compliance a lot easier than converting in and out of Ethereum or whatever. So if you can spare a few, send them my way. Make some cool stuff happen.
Awesome. Thanks, Blake.